Thank you, everyone. Welcome to this special live taping of Gaslit Nation. Yay! Oh, you guys are so nice. Thank you so much. I'm extremely honored and thrilled to be here. Thank you to my dear sister from another mother, Olga Lautman, who is fighting the good fight for great personal risk to herself, especially all the cigarettes she smokes. We're gathered here really for an intervention with you, Olga, because we need you to stick around for as long as possible. I'm dead serious, really serious. Olga, stop. And then, of course, there's Ruth Ben-Ghiat, the historian, who everyone knows and loves, who is so photogenic on MSNBC. When you come on the TV, I'm like, I stop what I'm doing and I watch. And you're just like this soothing voice telling us about how effed we all are.
Yeah, that's the brand saying I get emails, people say, you're saying terrifying things, but somehow I feel comforted. I'm like, okay.
Really, it's like Oprah's favorite things coming at me. I'm like, and we're here to celebrate the Gaslit Nation graphic novel. I have to get this out of the way because that's the excuse we used to come together tonight. And the Gaslit Nation graphic novel is called Dictatorship. It's easier than you think. Sarah and I wrote it together during the hellfire of the pandemic when we were fighting to warn everyone about the slow-moving coup of Trump and his Kremlin clown car that was quickly accelerating, because it's called accelerationism for a reason, into a fast-moving coup, right? We even had that pre-coup special that we announced on the show. And that book we wrote to stay grounded, to stay sane. We wrote it in the spirit of the Colbert Report, the vintage Colbert show, where you follow this slimy trickster, this like attractive Roger Stone, meets it's like a composite character of all the co-conspirators that have been indicted. And he's the guy that Ruth can tell you has existed throughout history and helping bring these toxic people, these narcissists, these psychopaths, these dictators to power. Dictators do not come to power alone. It takes a village of co-conspirators. And so that's what the book is, and we are very honored by it, thrilled by it. The illustrator is Kasia Babis, who is a brilliant human rights activist in Poland. She was working to bring food to the refugees that Russia and Belarus dumped on the border of Poland. And she is a feminist that has been, put her own life on the line in fighting for women's rights in Poland against a very Trumpian government there, against their total abortion ban. And she's posted photos of herself with blood on her face and other things. That's our illustrator. So she had a lot to say with this book, just like Sarah and I did. It was very much a time capsule, a diary, capturing what we were all living through, that collective horror, that collective grief. And shortly before it went to print, when we were reviewing the final copy, that's when the disinformation was spreading about the Kremlin's total genocide of Ukraine. And I made some last-minute changes to fact-check in real time what Gaslit Nation listeners were sending me, saying, well, what do you have to say about this? And I was like, oh, well, I put it in the book. And so it's a document, it's a living document of this history that we're all sharing in. And so I'm going to get straight to questions, because this is a genuine conversation. I'm a mom in America trying to raise two girls in a society that openly wants to kill them in any way, shape, or form, right? I don't know what future my girls are heading towards. I put a smile on my face every day to face them bravely and give them the best day ever, just like every parent out there. But I want to know, what am I raising them for? What will they have in the future? I watch these horrible YouTube videos going viral of like the incel movement, right? The Andrew Tates out there. I'm like, are you that to me? So I'm raising strong Nazi hunters, and I want them to be safe. I want them to be expressive. I want them to shine bright, and I want them to breathe clean air and vote and hold their wife's hand in public if that's what they feel like doing. And I want them just to live out loud. We all have that right to do that. And so as a mom, as an activist, as an independent journalist, I'm turning genuinely before your eyes here, as we all are together, to these wonderful women, these experts, to help me understand what's going on, what do we do about it, how do I stop feeling like I'm lying to my girls every time I smile to them. So I'm going to turn to you, Ruth. Do you think Trump and Putin are winning, and what do you think will ultimately stop them? Your next book.
Small question. But first, I want to just say how very thrilled I am to see this book done in this format. It's really important that it's telling the story through images as a graphic novel. Also, it captures the kind of, there's this, if you work on these awful people, like some of the most horrible people who ever lived, you pick up in your research kind of a certain dark humor that people who live with these people, under these people, develop to get through. And somehow the graphic novel format adds that. It captures some of that dark humor, which is important not to make light of anything at all, but to reach people. Because this book is going to reach people who might not read my book. You know, they will read a graphic novel. And so I'm so happy that you did this. I know it was a lot of work, but it's incredible.
Thank you so much. That means so much coming from you, because strong men is essential.
So in terms of are they winning, I actually feel that at the macro level, I'm actually quite hopeful, and this won't happen overnight, but there is a kind of turning away from authoritarianism. A lot of these, like Russia has been exposed as a, kind of ravaged, the armed forces ravaged by corruption. Putin, hundreds of thousands of Russians left. In Turkey, there's just hundreds of thousands of people trying to leave because they see after the earthquake that the government was uncaring, didn't care about them. You have mass protests starting. This is really very important, and the media doesn't cover this as a systemic thing. There are major mass protests all over the world in places that never have mass protests, or they're the biggest protests they've ever had, or they haven't had such a big one for many years, like Iran, right? China, the Chinese protest, we didn't hear, it was shut down quickly, but 79 universities had protests in China, including Xi Jinping's alma mater. The reason I'm hopeful in general is there is a kind of groundswell of activity, also people working, who feel existentially threatened and by the plunder politics that is in both certain kinds of democracies and authoritarian states. So there's a move building that's for a new kind of anti-authoritarian age. In the meantime, though, we've got these two efforts there. And I like to say, I don't like to say it, but every day that Putin is still in the war killing Ukrainians is a victory for Putin. That is undeniably true because it's a genocidal war. But I do think that he has made himself, he has weakened himself even before the Prigozhin thing. And in fact, there's a concept I've developed called autocratic backfire, where autocrats who are full of hubris, they don't listen to anybody, they make stupid decisions without proper feedback. And 2 days after Putin invaded Ukraine, I wrote an MSNBC op-ed saying this wasn't going to go well. And I'm not a Russia specialist like Olga or you, but I'm an autocrat specialist. So in the long run, I think that he is not going to win. Trump's a little more difficult. Trump is...
He's running for president with 4 indictments.
He's running for president, and the fatal flaw was to allow him to be there for 2 years paying no price. It's very, very important that he's indicted now, that all these co-conspirators are indicted. But what it did from the point of view of personality cults, which your book talks about, is that the strongman has to seem untouchable by the law. He has to seem that he can get away with things. That's the essence of authoritarianism, is getting away with crime. And that Trump seemed to do for his followers. So this is why, in part, his personality cult is still totally, it's ridiculous. The guy hasn't been in office for years, and he's still like super popular, right? He's still in control of the GOP. And that scandalous, I'll end with this, I will never forget that debate where they all raised people running against Trump. If you study authoritarian dynamics, they're running against Trump, but they did a loyalty performance as though they were in like Mobutu's Zaire.
They raised their arm.
They raised their hands to pledge that they would, support him even if he becomes a criminal. This is like the essence of the staging of authoritarianism. So he's very strong right now. I don't know what will happen on that. It's kind of ironic that you'll see if you agree, that we can say that in a way Putin's future, because of the war, is dimmer than Trump's right now.
What do you think, Olga?
First of all, thank you so much for having me, and congratulations on your book. It's amazing. I'm really excited for it and happy that so many people will have access to seeing what dictatorships are, how they come to power in a different form from people who, normally don't want to read a full, book.
I'm taking Olga out to dinner later.
It's a very complicated question. I am definitely more hopeful than I was a few years ago. I mean, in 2015 and 16, I was devastated. I was watching Russia's attacks from the Russian side, and I saw the tactics they were using, and I knew that they were going to succeed. So this time around, though, it's hard to answer. On one hand, long term, they're both going to fail. I am very confident, I'm hopeful on that end. Where I worry is that they have fractured our institutions, and the West is made of institutions, and as long as they have put the seed of distrust in institutions, it's going to be extremely hard to reverse that. And the way to reverse it is by dealing with corruption, because once regular, everyday people start seeing, officials not based on party, but if they're committing corruption, they're being charged, that's when you start rebuilding the trust. And for that, it's also difficult in U.S. because you had the Republican side for decades, basically taking over every local media outlet across the country. And it's harder to have independent journalists. And unfortunately, there's not enough investment to put these independent journalists in every single town to expose the corruption, whether it be a local sheriff or the state senator. So that is where I feel they are not winning. As far as with Trump, I frankly see him way weaker than he was years ago, because I think people have already seen who he is. He's called for protests. He's called for storming the FBI, storming courthouses, and basically attempting to incite violence. And frankly, no one's showing up. We had the one loon who ran and thought it was a smart idea to shoot at an FBI office, I forgot which state, and then eventually the state police killed him. But you don't see the same support. And if his support is weaker than it was in 2016, then I don't think he'll be able, in a general election, to get back into power. And as far as Putin is done. I mean, frankly, in 2021, I was monitoring Russia's preparations for a full-scale invasion. And I remember saying over and over, the minute Putin pulls this, and if the West reacts properly, he will be done. And Putin had miscalculated. He thought he was going to get a bunch of deep concerns from politicians, as what happened when he illegally annexed Crimea and occupied parts of Ukraine, Donbass, and Luhansk in 2014. But the West came together. Biden did an amazing job building a strong coalition that literally a year and a half later has withheld so many pressures. And is still standing strong and ready to support and understand more so that if Putin succeeds in Ukraine, Moldova is next. Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia, Poland, any one of the NATO members minus Moldova, that's American troops in Europe that we have to send. So right now it's Ukrainians sacrificing their blood to stop the threat inside of that country. So Putin is finished. It's just a matter of time when he is removed. And even though Russia is not Putin, despite the media trying to convince people that Putin holds the power of Russia. Putin is a symptom of the system, and this is a century-old system, basically, where he, draws back to historical tendencies of what's happened under Tsars and the Bolsheviks, the communists and whatnot. And this time he took it a step too far, and he's weakening inside. The West is doing an incredible job putting pressure, sanctions-wise, sending weapons. Now, my problem is that the weapons aren't getting there fast enough. We shouldn't have been in discussions for 6-8 months of whether tanks should go or not go, because they could have been there already, and Russia wouldn't have had the chance to fortify the front lines and mine the hell out of them. But ultimately, Putin every single day is weakening. And when the Soviet Union collapsed, there was less of an internal threat because of the lack of money. Here we are talking about trillions of dollars these people stole from the country, from the state resources. And the fact that now you have a lot of businessmen and his, heads of state companies and people surrounding him that have been cut off from access, at least from the West, of this money and can't move the money freely. I don't see him lasting, for long. And with that said, once Putin goes, even though, like I said, that Putin is just a symptom of the system, once Putin goes, there will be a disruption. And it's literally going to be like the 90s on steroids, where you're going to see people vying for power and, killing each other. You're going to see, again, car explosions and assassinations in order to secure the key positions. And with that, they will be distracted inside, which means that it will take them a few years before they can continue carrying out these information operations against us, against Europe, against the United States. So the whole world will have a temporary reprieve. So I'm hopeful, but I still think we need to really focus on rebuilding trust in the institutions, because democracy is about institutions. It's about our trust in them, and it's about our basically participation in it. And I think in America, including myself, we all took for granted until 2016. We thought America is the safe haven, especially for immigrants who came here and saw it as, we're safe. And I think, in 2016, we got a huge wake-up call when we saw how, for decades, the Republicans were organizing, and here we were left blindsided. And now we, saw the after effects of pretty much things that we were dealing with post-Civil War, we are now dealing with again. So I think we need to work on it, and I am very hopeful on that end, because I remember in 2016 when I would look on Twitter, people would spread Russian disinformation without even understanding they're doing it. They didn't even mean to. Like, they were anti-Trump, they were anti-Russia, but they did it. Now, people are so savvy. They're like, oh, that's a Russian disinformation. Oh, that's a bot, that's a troll. And that in itself, that knowledge is extremely important for people, to go forward.
Hey Gaslit Nation listeners, in recent years I've been all about baby soft products for my 2 little kids. There's baby soft bedding for us grown-ups that I'm proud to endorse, and that's Cozy Earth bedding. Named one of Oprah's favorite things in 2018, Cozy Earth's best-selling bamboo sheet set is temperature regulating and incredibly soft. Cozy Earth's bedding collection offers a variety of luxury pillows, sheets, blankets, and more. Luxury bedding essentials backed by a lengthy warranty. Cozy Earth's linen bedding collection adds casual elegance to any space and captures the fabric's breezy, timeless appeal. Pamper yourself this fall with fresh, new bed linens from Cozy Earth, made from luxurious, high-quality fabrics you won't find anywhere else in the market. Cozy Earth provided an exclusive offer for our listeners today, up to 35% off site-wide when you use the code GASLIT. That's 35% off site-wide when you use the code GASLIT. And that's another way to support our show by showing advertisers that Gaslit Nation is essential listening. So check out Cozy Earth today and get 35% off site-wide when you use the code GASLIT, GASLIT. Thank you so much. There's another element of it, though, that's out there today that was there in 2016. And it's just this vitriol, anger, and I want to say hatred, and just this storming of the barricade that was very clearly there in 2016. There were private Facebook groups for women people to come together and support Hillary Clinton. They couldn't do it out in the open. I remember the streams on Twitter of people, especially young people, saying, I hate Hillary, I want her to die. And they were supporters from other candidates. And we're seeing that now towards Biden. We're seeing that now about how many people just hate Biden. And it's coming from a place, I think a justifiable place, because we're seeing what climate scientists have warned us about for decades finally hitting us, coming to pass. People are living in economic anxiety. You have depression, anxiety levels over, are we all gonna boil alive? Or are we gonna burn alive? Like all of the news cycle from Hawaii to the Canadian fires and the floods, what happened in Libya, and we're living in dystopias now. And people are looking to our elected officials and wanting to physically, verbally shake them and say, wake the fuck up, you're killing us. Like, we need to see you, like there's no action, like you should be ringing the alarm. Why are we dealing with these knucklehead Nazis when we've got bigger problems like the corporate greed that's going to just kill us all for a short-term gain? You know, they're gonna die too. You can't hide in a billionaire bunker, that's an oxymoron. And so I'm seeing a lot of that 2016. I will be on the show blasting Biden for, let's say, East Palestine, right? With what happened with that rail car, creating a cancer cluster in Ohio. And then I'll say, but Biden's keeping my friends and family alive in Ukraine. And then people on Twitter will be like, boo-hoo, like fuck your family and friends in Ukraine. I hate Biden, and you're automatically a Biden shill. And I get that all the time. And I haven't seen this level since 2016. And I don't know what to say to them because I have trouble sleeping at night too. We're in the same boat. But I think, and what I'm trying to sell, what I'm trying to advocate for is the only way out, really. And it's like, I know it's not fashionable. I know I'm not going to get invited to like the cool parties, like the cool panels, except for this one. But you need to flood the system. You need to become the new system. You need to run for office. You need to recruit and help good people run for office. You have to pay attention. And what people hear is like, oh, you're telling me I have to work? I'm like, yeah. When people think I'm like a Thumper from Bambi on the podcast, like being like a little talking bunny in the woods, they don't understand that my chipperness comes from a really dark place, like years of dark nights of the soul. I could have complained about Mr. Jones and how the rampant misogyny, the toxic masculinity, that's all Hollywood is. Nobody wanted my screenplay. I had to outsmart the system. I had to infiltrate the system. I had to find the allies and build with my allies in the system. So when I'm telling everyone on the podcast again and again and again, you are the new system now. We are the new system. You're the one you've always been waiting for. You need to get in there. You need to help people run for office. No, but I want to bash things. You don't think I want to bash things? Let me just tell you something. Sorry, Ruth, we're going to get to you because we're not going to waste you're sitting, Ruth Ben-Ghiat's right there. And I'm like, let me tell you my life story. You've heard it all. Like in high school, I was on like a top 10 list of like the principal's most dangerous students. I had what is known as an anger problem. Like a girl thought she could corner me in home ec, and I had a hot iron in my hand, put two and two together. Okay, I had detention for like weeks. When I was in college, I got in a bar fight with a frat boy football player, and I woke up with like his hair and skin under my nails. Okay, I have an anger problem. Like I want to bash things. So when I'm looking at all of this, we're going to storm the barricade, and you're a Biden shill if you're not with us. I've done my work on myself, okay? That might have been me 20 years ago, but I've done the work. I've met myself in that darkness, and I've come out the other side, and I've built things. And I understand fully well, there is no alternative to creativity and building. Destruction will not get us there. Ripping each other down will not get us there. Bullying will not get us there. Lifting each other up, learning to trust yourself and find your voice, help carrying along others and helping them find their voice, having empathy in your heart for others even when it's hard, there is no alternative to that right now. And I know we have fantasies of the French Revolution, a woman-led like a woman-instigated movement. But what ended up happening with the French Revolution was once the violence takes over, it becomes a blood sport, and the sadists have a field day. And just to illustrate that, Marie Antoinette and her husband, the king, beheaded, okay, good, gone with them, right? They should have known better, the writing was on the wall. But what happened to the new king, their like 12-year-old child, or however old he was? The king they left behind, their orphan son, was tortured. So these French revolutionaries, these guillotine builders, they tortured a child. Like that's what happens when you unleash violence. You lose control over it, and it controls you. So I'm just telling all the people that want to bash instead of build, get a wiffle ball, take a kickboxing, go get a pillow. I'm the anger management queen by necessity, and I'm telling you, there is no alternative to you must build and create.
Look, we have a lot of issues. Clearly, putting it on Biden is laughable, considering the bureaucracy in this country. I mean, for them, I'm sure to change a light bulb in Congress has to go through several departments and 100 emails. Democracy, like I said, is us. It's all of us. We have to make the difference. And the difference is made, and the biggest effects seen to people's lives are not from what Biden does. It is from what your state senate does, what your local judges do, what your school boards do. And violence definitely is not the solution, because once you cross that line into violence, especially unprovoked, that is where you now will have like the mega movement who were literally ready to burn their like people's children because they were wearing a mask during COVID, and they were burning masks in front of schools and being completely irrational. You will have that, happening if, God forbid, it happens on the left, then they're going to say, well, they're doing it. So if they're doing it, it's fine. And this is basically, just to take it back to Russia, Putin and his thugs have committed atrocities inside of Russia. They've jailed people. They've, took away independent, whatever little fraction of independent media there is. And they committed a lot of human rights abuses, as do all autocrats. But the day that we had our Capitol stormed, and in the most blatant terrorist attack that was being, live for several hours, guess what? Now Russia can turn around and say, oh, you know what? But look what's happening there. Now they're arresting those people. Those are political prisoners. Meanwhile, they weren't political prisoners. I'd love to see, how Russia would handle someone storming, the Kremlin. But once you cross over into the violence unprovoked, then you are as equal, and then you lose your higher ground. And the only time that violence would be acceptable is, for instance, during in Ukraine in 2014, when they had a corrupt pro-Kremlin treasonous president, Yanukovych. Ukrainians came out, but they came out peaceful. The only time that it turned into violence was when the security services started killing them, shooting at them, beating them, torturing them, dumping, tortured bodies in Maidan Square. That's when it turned into violence. But it didn't start that way.
Yes to self-defense. Yeah. No to instigating, self-defense, yes.
No to unprovoked violence.
So Ruth, right now, dystopias now, and we have, of course, genocidal rhetoric, the scapegoating of LGBTQ plus people, non-white people, immigrants coming in. It's now, especially with the anti-gay laws and trans people being denied life-affirming care. I have a friend who was in a blue state who didn't feel comfortable in a certain area holding her wife's hand in public. And that's heartbreaking. What do you say to the people who are living under fascism now? And how do we get them out from under? How do we protect them?
Yeah, I think what's already been said about we have to be the change, running for office, supporting those who are running for office. It's very difficult to be in a position of enormous fear. And what's so horrible, and I've been tracking this very closely for a long time, the GOP is in this kind of spiral of radicalization. That's what I call it. And although January 6th didn't work, it almost worked. It came way closer than people know. And they're kind of drunk on this lawlessness. And so Ron DeSantis is a good bellwether because he's like an empty shell of a person who makes himself into what he thinks will help him get ahead. And so he is constantly using violent rhetoric now, not just the famous, thing where he said, on my first day as president, we're going to slit throats. I mean, this is how gangsters talk. This is how Duterte talked in the Philippines. But even when he doesn't lose a single moment to not talk about committing violence. When Trump was arraigned, and he was asked, probably because the reporter knew it would annoy him, did you watch the arraignment? What does he say? So he's governor of a really big state. He's got a lot to do. He says, I was overseeing an execution. So I track all these things. And then there's Matt Gaetz, who goes to the state fair. And the state fair is the perfect place to engage in radicalization. Everybody's eating their corn dogs. They're with their, they're distracted because their toddlers are peeing and whatever's going on. And Matt Gaetz is there with Trump, his leader. And he slips in. He has normal campaign rhetoric. We're going to win. And then he says, only force can bring change to Washington, D.C. So I was like, whoa, okay. Because what he's saying is we no longer as a party are going to depend on elections, on democratic reform, or any kind of legislation. This is fascist rhetoric. Only violence will do it. So this is why I say they're in a spiral of radicalization. And it's very, very difficult and very frightening. But the answer is not, to pick up what was said before, to become violent ourselves. And it's easy to blame Biden, but honestly, if you study authoritarianism and what the conditions have been cyclically to create an environment where they can have an appeal, the stuff that Biden is doing, the large scale, the student debt stuff, the large scale economic and social reform, bringing back manufacturing to help communities. This is stuff that's not going to have an effect right now. So people are like, well, screw him. We need stuff now, right? We're under siege right now. But that actually lifting up communities and changing economic circumstances for the long run is how you defeat authoritarianism, because you address despair. That's what Trump went in. Trump was so smart, where he identified, he's a marketer. He looked at the political marketplace and he found these people who were hurting, white working class, and Clinton wasn't addressing them, the Democrats overlooked them. And he's like, you're the forgotten, I love you. And you are forgotten no longer. He seemed like the person who was going to help them, right? And they didn't know he's just playing with them, right? So there are things that we can learn from all of this. And in fact, Biden is, with all the stuff in manufacturing, all the jobs created. I don't have much patience. Of course he's should he do more on climate? Yes, he's done more than others. Of course we want him to do more on climate and other things. And he's not a figurehead, but he's a convenient symbol of the democratic establishment. And it's, of course, very easy to be frustrated, but that, in my humble opinion, is not the right target. The targets have to be the fascists in our midst, get them out of office, because these are the people preaching violence. Having studied fascism for years, the violent stuff, I'm all over that. That is the red line. That is the line. What they've been doing, and Trump's been doing this since 2015. So if you want, fascists have done it and other authoritarians, you have to change the public's perception of violence. That's one of the major goals of propaganda. You have to get people to see violence as morally righteous and necessary. So Trump, and I had the honor of being interviewed and doing a report for the January 6th committee, and this is what it was about. And I compiled a list, and I got really scared when I was compiling this list. And I never underestimate Trump. he had he uses his rallies as radicalization sites and interviews and all that, but hundreds of rallies over the years where he talked about violence in a positive way. Like, in the old days, we could carry people out in a stretcher, now you can't do that. You can't hurt people anymore. Over and over and over again. And so that's why Matt Gaetz and these other people in DeSantis, they're continuing this kind of, and that's how you get fascism. So Biden and the Democrats are not doing that, and they are the bulwark. They are the fortress, the citadel against these people who are really trying to create a fascist population that will engage in violence. We already had January 6th, so we already saw how that ends.
But people look at the income inequality, the staggering levels. People look at the promises that were not kept, especially on climate, and the fact that you have Gen Z desperate for a climate emergency. And so there's this feeling of we're held hostage by the oligarchy. We're held hostage by corporate corruption, corporate exploitation, because if we don't vote for the Democrats, then we're all going to be in camps and watch our children be murdered in front of us. It's like sort of the alternative is like you must maintain the status quo of corporations, having captured both parties, and any pushback against it, it's game over for you.
But without a doubt, there's an element of the Democratic Party, and it's not only skewed with age, some of it is that they are elitist of a different era, right? But the answer to that is exactly what happened after the Women's March, for example. The Women's March was the biggest nonviolent protest ever in American history. It was doubly important because thousands of women got energized, progressive women, to run for office, young women. And in 2018, a lot of them got in. And that's how you get the AOCs. That's how you get the people who perhaps, and again, it's not only skewing on age, it's more like progressive. You've got to support them. I interviewed Amanda Littman, and she's the head of Run for Something. You've got to support these people. And now, again, it takes time, and so people justifiably say, we don't have time, right? I'm threatened because I'm gay today. Or, my city is up in flames from climate change today. But what's the alternative if you don't support this?
Exactly, and I'll add to that. Look, we don't have to imagine. All you have to do is peek over into probably we're at 25 states that have practically banned abortion, that are going after the LGBTQ community. You don't have to imagine this is what they're going to do. They're doing it right now. Whereas you have states that are controlled by Democrats. Maybe the Democrats are not a perfect party. Personally, I stay away as far as I can from politics. But right now, our biggest concern is to stop fascism here. That's our biggest concern, to stop the violence, to stop fascism, because if this spreads to all the states, we're not going to be able to deal with climate change. We're not going to be able to deal with serious issues. So first, we have to, basically vote and do everything we can, mobilize everyone. Right now, frankly, my frustration with the Democrats, every university should be visited and every single woman should be spoken to. That basically Republicans want to have some freaking old guy who is going to come and tell you what you can do with your body, which is absurd. No one should have control over a woman's body. So first we have to defeat that. Then we can go and start perfecting. We can work
we defeat fascism and we build the world we want on the local level. Because that's where the scariest threats are, the school boards, the government,
that's exactly it. Because look, with the COVID.
I want to get to Ukraine fatigue, because I'm not talking at all about talking about Ukraine, but I sense a lot of my super cool hipster friends and media especially don't talk about Ukraine anymore. It's missing from their timelines. And when they do, they're feeding into the look at Ukraine taking our, they're doing little subtle dog whistles to show the other cool hipster friends and media that it's corruption and they're anti-establishment. Meanwhile, Ukrainians are just desperate to survive a genocide. And it's just surreal to me, because in 2016, I remember telling a friend in media, I'm like, Paul Manafort's here, that means the Kremlin's here. You don't understand what the Kremlin's done to Ukraine. And she said to me, Andrea, Americans don't care about Ukraine. And she was right. And Obama said the same thing with his foreign policy. What does Ukraine have to do with us? And that attitude is back. And I see it on the Twitter timelines of people who should know better, but they're clout chasing and or they're self-censoring because they know that Elon Musk is going for the Twitter people. And God forbid if their tweets get hidden and they can't promote their books and sell their books and like make money. So Ukraine has to be a sacrificial lamb. That has to go. So I was unfashionable in 2016 when I was warning everyone about the Kremlin and Ukraine, and I'm happy to be unfashionable again going into 2024. That's like my sweet spot. So what do you say to Ukraine fatigue and where it came from and what to do about it?
It's difficult to evaluate because so much is the Russians have been hammering this, and they've got so many agents like Marjorie Taylor Greene and countless other people.
And on the left,
Yeah.
like all of these podcasters, like
Right.
doped up with Peter Thiel money and David Sachs money, like the PayPal mafia.
You have to remember the Soviet Union initially targeted the left. It was always the left that was the target since, the
I
Cold
made a film
War.
about it.
Yeah, and that's who was targeted. It was the left. I mean, the right was a fairly new phenomenon over the past maybe decade and a half, but it was left. So now you see, and the left is always with these American colonialism, and the CIA is behind everything on this planet because they apparently
American
exist.
imperialism and the CIA is well functioning. And actually, yeah.
But it's a failure of education because it's very clear what Russia stands for, and it's an existential threat. And as you said, you don't have to be into the geopolitics of the area to know that, like autocrats, that he will go for other countries. And so what's needed is a kind of generosity of spirit, and somehow people are no longer, it's partly fatigue, but it's partly that they're not connecting themselves to this struggle. It seems too remote, or they used to, but they no longer do. But I do think people have been assaulted by psychological warfare and information warfare so much that, and then here we go with also when the worst things get locally, and there's lots of crisis actors in the GOP who are Russian assets, who want to make things as bad as possible locally. So you don't have the energy. You're too much at siege in your town or in your city, so you don't have the energy to see the connections. So what I always try and do in my work is show the connections between things, like autocrats and environmental plunder, and how they're an existential threat, because that's how you counter that. But it's challenging, right? And the more that the local becomes fraught and dangerous, where people are being forced out as election workers or town council members or librarians. If you teach at a university, you could be fired now. The more that's all fraught, you don't have the luxury you feel of caring about Ukraine. And yet it's all connected.
It's all connected. The Republican Party is mobbed up with that Russian mafia and the Kremlin. It's the same enemy. And they want to divide us and pit Ukrainians against people like who are really desperate and hurting, and we can't let them do that.
Yeah, no, the support must continue for Ukraine because, frankly, I think the best thing we can all start doing is, for starters, explaining to people that if their pothole on their street is broken, that has absolutely zero to do with the money going to Ukraine. And this is where there's a huge disconnect because people think that the Pentagon budget is supposed to fix your local, things where it is not. And if you can count how much money was going to Iraq and Afghanistan on a daily basis per what is going to Ukraine on a daily basis, and Ukraine is holding the line. Ukraine is Europe. I mean, if, God forbid, Russia succeeds in Ukraine and moves in through Europe, which they say.
But Russia's going to succeed in Florida with all like the dark money it's pumping into Florida. Like
Well, I
Russia's
mean,
going to
they're
succeed in
pumping,
like,
well,
it's not just Europe. It's like
Yeah.
this, it's our.
But that's
it's our,
been happening for the past decade
but that's
here,
going to continue
unfortunately.
and become more emboldened.
Yeah.
So what do we do, Ruth, if we wake up one morning in November and Trump's won the Electoral College again? He'll lose the popular vote, but he sneaks through the Electoral College. What do we do?
What do? We protest. We go out we go out into the streets, nonviolent, and we show, like as happened in 2017. Again, I'm going to repeat myself. Why? Because 2017 led to thousands of people running for office, and that has changed our political system. The lesson of history is that you have to use the rights you have at every moment. If you don't use them, there are people all too willing to take them away. And then later, what you have in your book, one of the themes is, who could have seen it coming, right? And I'm thinking a lot right now about denial, because they're traumatized, they're tired, but they're also in denial, and they don't really want, like when I'm on TV or I'm at an event and all, I say like really blunt things, like, the GOP's an autocratic party of criminals, or, it's in a spiral of radicalization. And people look at me like, really? It just seems exaggerated. It's upsetting to people. And it can't happen here stuff. That's very, very strong in America, that it can't happen here. As somebody who I didn't really study American history too much, I always studied like other histories, and so I look at America. It's like our democracy only started, in the '60s. It's like with the civil rights movement. That's when it started. So it's young, and there's huge backlash.
My French husband calls us a teenager.
Yeah. So people don't see it that way, and so they're in enormous denial. That's with also the January 6th. And it's also interesting when these things come out, like Mitt Romney, who sent that text to Mitch McConnell, like, hi, I heard that, there might be like bombs and stuff like that. And then Mitch McConnell didn't reply. But what I think is interesting is that we know that now there's these co-conspirators, the Mark Meadows, et cetera. But there's a whole other group of people like Mitt Romney who knew about things. Now, we don't really know what he did. But what's shocking is that these are people who are among the most powerful people in our nation, with access through their years of being in the Senate and all the other, in the Pentagon, they had access to everyone and everything and intelligence, and yet they didn't do anything. They didn't band together. So while we have been focusing on the co-conspirators, there's all these other people who just maybe thought that it can't really happen. It can't happen here. So that's a big problem that we have to face. And that's why, like, each one of us can do it in our own way. I try and, educate people and warn them that no place is immune. In fact, all the case studies in my book, every society was shocked that it happened to them. And even when there was a coup in Chile, this is super interesting, the Christian Democrats actually thought that Pinochet was going to just restore order and then give back power to democracy. Well, that didn't happen. So it's not just us who is, we perhaps are worse than others, but it's a syndrome. It's a psychological syndrome.
There's nothing exceptional here. And so final question, what would you say to the parents that have to raise their children in America in this, like what could you tell to the parents? Like, do their children have a future?
Yeah, it's very dangerous. It would be very dangerous to tell your children that they wouldn't have a future. You have to tell them.
They might read it on your face, and anxiety, like, why is mom always yelling at the TV?
Well, you could spin that as engagement and passion.
She's out again at a protest. Mom and dad don't see each other anymore.
My son runs around telling people, my mommy, what does your mom do? Oh, she's out to kill Putin.
Exactly. But the worst thing is indifference. The indifference, the not acting at all, is what allows autocracy to come in and allows institutionalized racism to endure. So setting an example in whatever way it is that you feel you can contribute, there are many ways, is important. And letting your kids know. I have a daughter, so I think that's important to model that.
Our discussion continues, and you can get access to that by signing up on our Patreon at the Truth Teller level or higher. To help people in Maui rebuild, donate to the Maui Strong Fund at hawaiicommunityfoundation.org. That's hawaiicommunityfoundation.org. And if you or a friend want to go to Burning Man next year, instead donate that money to the Ali Forney Center, the largest community center in the U.S. helping homeless LGBTQ youth. To help humanitarian aid in Ukraine, donate to Rosam for Ukraine at rosam4ukraine.org. In addition, we encourage you to donate to the International Rescue Committee, a humanitarian relief organization helping refugees from Ukraine, Syria, and Afghanistan. Donate at rescue.org. And if you want to help critically endangered orangutans already under pressure from the palm oil industry, donate to the Orangutan Project at theorangutanproject.org. Gaslit Nation is produced by Sarah Kenzier and Andrea Chalupa. If you like what we do, leave us a review on iTunes. It helps us reach more listeners. And check out our Patreon. It keeps us going. Our production manager is Nicholas Torres, and our associate producer is Carlin Daigle. Our episodes are edited by Nicholas Torres, and our Patreon-exclusive content is edited by Carlin Daigle. Original music in Gaslit Nation is produced by David Whitehead, Martin Vissenberg, Nick Farr, Damian Arriaga, and Carlin Daigle. Our logo design was donated to us by Hamish Smith at the New York-based firm Order. Thank you so much, Hamish. Gaslit Nation would like to thank our supporters at the producer level on Patreon and higher. Withrow C. Newell, Chick Quinn, Lily Wachowski, Sean Rubin, Todd S. Perlstein, Kenny Main, John Schoenthaler, Ellen McGirt, Joel Ferron, Larry Gasson, Karen A. Deal, David Collier, Tatjana Birch, Karen Heisler, Ann Bertino, John Millett, David East, Ida, Joseph Mara Jr., Julie Matthews, Meganopolis, Mark, Barbara Kittredge, Matthew Womack, Sean Berg, Kristen Custer, William Barry Reeves, Emmy, Kevin Gannon, Mike Christensen, Sandra Collins, Katie Masuris, Emily Fenning, James D. Leonard, Leo Chalupa, Carol Golstad, Jason Banky, Marcus J. Trent, Joe Darcy, Ann Marshall, Jeremy Lewis, Trigve, D.L. Singfield, Nicole Spear, Abby Road, Margaret Romero, Jans Alstrup Rasmussen, Sarah Gray, Diana Gallagher, John Ripley, Leah Campbell, Jared Lombardo, Ann Marshall, Tanya Chalupa. Thank you all so much for your support. We could not make Gaslit Nation without you.